The dining room fell into a silence, so sharp it almost seemed to hum. Crystal glasses trembled faintly under the warm chandelier light, and every man at the long mahogany table kept his eyes on the contract waiting to be signed. Vincent Cole sat at the head of the table, still as stone, one hand resting near the pen, the other beside a black leather folder that held the future of 3 companies and more money than most people would ever see in a lifetime. Across from him, 2 lawyers adjusted their cuffs, a security man watched the doors, and a nervous executive forced a smile that never reached his eyes. Everything looked polished, controlled, and final. But Emma Brooks, carrying a tray of untouched wine glasses through the edge of the room, noticed the smallest detail that changed everything. The man in the gray suit never once looked at the contract. He kept glancing at Vincent's glass, then at the folder, then at the door. Emma's pulse quickened. She had learned to read people the way other people read menus. Years of working in this restaurant had taught her that men with expensive watches and quiet voices often hid the ugliest intentions. And tonight, the air around this table felt wrong. Too tense, too rehearsed, too perfect. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly as the executive across from him spoke in a smooth, polished tone about partnership and trust, but Emma noticed the tightness in Vincent's jaw. He did not trust easily. She could see that from the way he sat, as if the entire room belonged to him and still somehow offended him. The waiter at the side of the room stumbled, a fork clattered to the floor, and nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Emma bent to pick it up, giving herself a second to breathe, and that was when she saw it. A folded note, half hidden beneath the edge of the linen cloth near Vincent's place setting. It had not been there before. She was sure of it. Her stomach dropped. The note looked ordinary, almost harmless, but something about the way it had been slipped there made it feel like a warning wrapped in paper. Emma straightened slowly, her fingers tightening around the tray. She told herself to keep walking, to stay invisible, to do the one thing a waitress in a room full of dangerous men was supposed to do. But then Vincent lifted his gaze, and for one brief second, his eyes met hers. There was no softness there, no invitation, only the cold, alert stillness of a man who had survived too many betrayals to ignore a stranger's face. Emma hesitated. The executive was reaching for the pen. The lawyers were preparing their smiles. The contract was about to be signed. And Emma, heart pounding hard enough to hurt, knew that if she stayed silent, whatever was about to happen at this table would destroy more than a deal. Emma did not realize she had been holding her breath until the tray in her hands began to shake. Vincent's gaze still lingered on her for half a second longer than it should have, as if he were measuring whether she was a threat, a mistake, or something far more dangerous. The only person in the room who had noticed what the others had missed. The executive's fingers hovered over the pen, and the moment stretched thin and fragile, like glass about to crack. Emma's feet should have carried her away. That was the smart thing. That was the safe thing. But the note beneath the linen had already burned itself into her mind, and the way the gray-suited man kept watching Vincent's glass had sent a cold blade of certainty through her chest. She knew that look. She had seen it once before, in a motel hallway 2 winters ago, right before a man she trusted never came home again. The memory flashed fast and ugly, and with it came the same instinct she had ignored that night. If something feels wrong, run toward the truth before it runs over you. Emma stepped closer to the table, careful, quiet, her shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. The room around her seemed to narrow. The lawyers were speaking now in low, polished voices, but their words sounded distant, useless, like background noise in a room where time had begun to slow. Vincent's jaw tightened as he read the expression on her face. He had the kind of face that made fear look foolish, a face carved from hard lines and colder decisions. But even he seemed to sense the shift in the air. "Miss," one of the security men said, already suspicious, already moving. Emma swallowed, her throat dry. She reached under the edge of the linen and pulled the folded note free. The paper felt lighter than it should have, but in her hand it carried the weight of a loaded weapon. The man in the gray suit went still. Too still. Emma saw the flicker in his eyes, a flash of panic quickly hidden behind a practiced smile. Vincent noticed it too. That was the moment everything changed. "What is that?" Vincent asked, his voice calm enough to be terrifying. Emma looked at him, then at the note, then at the man across the table whose expression had gone almost blank. "I think," she said quietly, though her heart was beating so hard it felt like it might split her ribs open. You should read it before you sign anything. The executive laughed, a short, brittle sound, and said it was absurd, that she was just a waitress, that she had no business interrupting a private negotiation. But Vincent did not move. He only held out one hand, palm up, and Emma realized he was not asking out of politeness. He was giving her one chance to prove she was either very brave or very stupid. She placed the note in his hand. For a second, no one in the room breathed. Vincent unfolded the paper slowly, his eyes scanning the words inside. Emma could not see the exact writing from where she stood, but she saw the change in his face, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the tightening of his mouth, the way his fingers curled as if the page itself had insulted him. When he looked up, the room had changed. The air was heavier now, the silence deeper. The man in the gray suit was no longer smiling. And Emma knew, with a sudden, terrible certainty, that whatever was written on that note had just stopped the deal, and possibly started a war. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room had gone so quiet that even the soft rustle of the linen curtains sounded like a confession. His eyes moved from the note to the man in the gray suit, and for one suspended second, Emma saw something dangerous awaken inside him. Not anger exactly, but the cold, disciplined kind of fury that makes powerful men more frightening than shouting ever could. The executive across the table tried to recover first, smoothing his cuff and forcing a calm smile. Vincent, whatever that says, it's a misunderstanding. But the words sounded thin, brittle, already broken. Vincent folded the note once, then again, as if he were compressing the entire room into something small enough to destroy with his bare hands. A misunderstanding, he repeated, almost thoughtfully, and that quiet repetition made the security men shift their weight. Emma stood frozen near the edge of the table, aware of every eye in the room now turning toward her. She should have felt regret. She should have worried that she had stepped too far into a world built to swallow people like her whole. Instead, she felt only a sharp, strange pulse of relief. She had said the thing. She had done the thing. Whatever came next, at least it would not be because she stayed silent. Vincent lifted the note slightly, just enough for the gray-suited man to see it. And then he looked up with a stare so cold it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. You were watching my glass, Vincent said. The executive's smile thinned. That's ridiculous. But Vincent did not blink. And you never looked at the contract. The man's jaw tightened. One of the lawyers glanced between them, uncertain now, his earlier confidence dissolving into confusion. The trap, whatever shape it had taken, was beginning to show its teeth. Emma noticed that the security man by the door had already taken one step forward, hand near his jacket, waiting for Vincent's signal. No one else spoke. No one dared. Vincent slid the contract away from him and opened the note fully, scanning it again with a slower, more deliberate expression. Emma tried not to stare, but she saw enough to understand the truth. There were names on that page. There were times, places, and a detail that made the executive's face lose color so quickly it was almost visible. Something had been planted. Something had been arranged for this exact moment. Vincent looked up once more, and this time his attention went not to the executive, but to Emma. For the first time, his expression changed in a way she had not expected. There was suspicion there, yes, but also something like recognition. Not of her face, but of her courage. Of the fact that she had entered a room ruled by fear and refused to kneel. Why? He asked quietly. It was not a question for the room. It was for her alone. Emma swallowed. Her mouth felt suddenly dry, but her voice came out steady enough. Because I heard enough to know you were being set up. The executive laughed again, louder this time, trying to reclaim control, but it came out wrong, strained and frantic. She's making this up. She's nobody. Vincent did not take his eyes off Emma. The room seemed to wait with him. Then, slowly, he set the note on the table and said, No. She's the only one here who told the truth. The words landed like a gunshot. The deal was dead now, though no one had yet admitted it. And the man in the gray suit, who had entered the room wearing confidence like armor, was already losing the war he thought he had won. The first crack in a man's power is never loud. It is usually a silence, a pause, a look that lasts half a second too long. That was what Emma saw now as the gray-suited executive stood perfectly still, his smile gone, his face stripped bare by the note lying on the table between him and Vincent. The room had shifted. The balance had moved, and everyone present could feel it. Vincent leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the armrest, the other near the contract, but he did not touch it again. He did not need to. The deal was already dead. "Tell me," he said, his voice low and level, "why my name is on a warning meant for someone who was supposed to be my partner." The executive's throat bobbed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Vincent's expression did not change. "Then explain the names." Emma could not see the note anymore, but she knew those names mattered. She had seen the way the color had drained from the executive's face when Vincent read it. That was enough. The lawyers, who had looked sharp and confident only minutes ago, now sat rigid as statues, their eyes darting nervously from one man to another. One of them cleared his throat as if he might still salvage the room, but no one listened. Outside the glass walls, the city glittered in soft, expensive lights, indifferent to the tension inside. Emma felt suddenly aware of how small she was in this space. Just a waitress in a black uniform, standing near a table built for men who signed away fortunes with a pen stroke. Yet she was also the reason the room had not exploded in silence and lies. Vincent's gaze returned to her again. It was sharper now, more focused, and not just because she had interrupted his deal. He was assessing her, weighing the risk of her existence, measuring whether she was part of the trap or the hand that had broken it open. Emma kept her shoulders square, even though her heart was racing. She had no intention of shrinking now. The executive pushed back his chair with a scrape that sounded too loud in the stillness. "This is insane," he snapped, the polished mask finally breaking. "She's a waitress. You're going to trust her over me." That was the wrong thing to say. Vincent looked at him with a disgust, so quiet it felt lethal. "I'm going to trust evidence," he said. Then, after a beat, an instinct, the executive's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Two security men shifted toward him immediately, not on Vincent's command, but in anticipation of what was coming next. Emma caught the tiny twitch at the corner of the man's mouth, the flash of someone realizing the game had collapsed and trying to find another exit. That was when Vincent nodded once toward the door. "Search him." The command cut through the room like a blade. The executive's expression shattered completely. One of the security men moved in, and the lawyers recoiled as if the confrontation itself might splash onto them. Emma's breath caught. Whatever was hidden in those pockets, in that phone, in that perfectly tailored suit, was about to be uncovered. Vincent finally rose from his chair, and the simple act of standing changed the air again. He was taller than Emma had imagined, broader too, and the stillness he carried was the kind that did not come from peace, but from absolute control. "If you came here to poison my deal," he said, looking directly at the executive, "then you should have chosen a room full of fools." His eyes flicked briefly to Emma. "You chose the wrong one." The security man's hand closed around the executive's wrist before the man could make another move. For a second, the entire room seemed to freeze on that single point of contact, as if everyone understood that what happened next would decide whether this ended as a scandal or something much worse. The executive jerked back, outrage flashing across his face, but the search had already begun. One guard checked his jacket. Another reached into the inner pocket of his suit. Emma watched, her pulse hammering against her throat, as a phone was pulled free, then a slim envelope, then a folded sheet of paper sealed in a way that looked far too official to be innocent. The executive's expression changed in real time from anger to panic. Vincent's eyes narrowed. He did not touch any of it. He didn't need to. The evidence was already speaking louder than the man ever had. "Interesting," Vincent said quietly. That one word made the executive swallow hard. The guard broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the document inside. Emma could not read it from where she stood, but the look on the guard's face was enough to tell her it was bad. Very bad. He handed it to Vincent. Vincent scanned the page once, then again, and Emma saw the exact moment his suspicion hardened into certainty. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a setup. A deliberate one. Names, dates, transfers, hidden instructions. Whatever was on that page, it mapped directly to the trap Emma had sensed from the beginning. The executive was breathing faster now, his polished confidence unraveling thread by thread. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. It sounded desperate, thin, almost pleading. Vincent turned the paper slightly toward him. You signed it, he said. The executive's face went pale. There it was. The fatal mistake. One sentence, one detail, and the whole room shifted again. Emma understood then that the note had not simply warned Vincent about a betrayal. It had exposed that betrayal in motion. A deal designed to funnel him into a financial trap. A document hidden inside a negotiation. A man pretending to be a partner while quietly arranging his destruction. The lawyers were no longer pretending to be calm. One had already pushed his chair back. Another was staring at the floor, as if looking anywhere else might keep him safe. Vincent glanced at the paper once more and then set it down with deliberate care, as though he were placing a coffin lid over the corpse of the deal. You came to my table with poison in your pocket, he said. The executive's mouth opened, then closed. No defense came. None would have helped. Vincent stepped closer, and the shift in power was immediate. The man who had looked expensive and untouchable now seemed smaller than his own suit. Who sent you? Vincent asked. The question landed like a blade. The executive shook his head too quickly. Too late. Vincent's gaze sharpened. Answer me. Emma noticed the terror in the executive's eyes now, and beneath it, something else. Fear of someone not in the room. Fear of a person higher up, farther away, more dangerous. That was the moment she realized this man had not been the mastermind. He had been a messenger, a disposable piece. And the real threat was still out there, hidden behind the polished walls of this city. Vincent seemed to reach the same conclusion at the same time. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice was colder than before. If you refuse to tell me who put you here, I'll find out myself. The executive's silence answered everything before he ever spoke. Vincent noticed it too. The slight tremor in the man's jaw. The bead of sweat at his temple. The way his eyes darted once, involuntarily, toward the far corner of the room where no one stood. It was a reflex, small and damning, and Vincent followed it with the precision of a predator tracking blood. So there is someone else, he said. The executive swallowed hard. You don't understand what you're getting into. Wrong answer, Vincent replied. The words were so calm, they felt like ice water poured over the room. Emma watched the exchange with her hands still curled around the tray she had forgotten to set down. She could feel the tension stretching tighter, like a wire ready to snap. This was no longer about a bad business deal. It was about leverage, betrayal, and the kind of hidden alliances that turned entire empires into ruins overnight. The guard still held the envelope, but now no one cared about the paper. The truth had already shifted into the open air, where it was harder to hide. Vincent took one step closer to the executive. Who ordered this? He asked again. The executive gave a bitter, humorless laugh. You think I'm the only one? Vincent's expression did not change, but Emma saw something in his eyes sharpen, a focus so intense it made the room seem smaller. No, he said. I think you're the one who panicked first. The executive's face twitched. Vincent had struck the nerve cleanly. The man looked away, and that tiny movement was louder than a confession. Emma felt a chill move through her. Whoever was behind this, they had expected Vincent to sign quickly, trust blindly, and lose everything before he understood the shape of the trap. But the note had changed the game. She had changed the game. Vincent turned to the lawyers. Who prepared this contract? One of them stiffened. Our office, through standard review. Vincent's eyes were cold enough to make the man's voice fail halfway through the sentence. Then someone in your office is lying. The lawyer went pale. Emma watched all of it unfold with a strange mix of fear and clarity. The room was no longer elegant, no longer controlled. It had become a crime scene dressed in expensive fabric. Vincent set the envelope on the table and, after a moment, looked at Emma again. This time, the look carried something new. Not just suspicion, not just assessment, but a quiet recognition that she had seen through the lie before anyone else. How did you know? He asked. Emma hesitated. The honest answer was messy, too personal, too dangerous. She could not tell him about the memory that had followed her here, about the betrayal she had seen before, about the reason she had learned to notice the wrong kind of silence. So she gave him the simplest truth. Because people don't hide fear that badly unless they're guilty. Vincent studied her face for a long second. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded once. Not a thank you. Not yet. But something close enough to matter. Stay where I can see you, he said. It was not a request. It was an order dressed as caution. Emma's breath caught, but she did not argue. Outside the glass walls, the city kept shining as if nothing had happened. Inside, the deal was dead, the trap was exposed, and the real name behind the betrayal was still waiting to be uncovered. Vincent glanced back at the executive one final time. "Now," he said, "you're going to tell me who thought they could bury me in my own room." The silence that followed Vincent's question was heavier than the contract ever had been. It pressed down on the room, thick and unforgiving, until even the smallest movement felt dangerous. The executive stood rigid under the weight of every eye, but his defiance had begun to fracture. Emma could see it in the way his shoulders tightened, in the way his fingers curled and uncurled at his sides, as though he were searching for a path out of a room with no doors. Vincent did not rush him. That was what made him terrifying. He gave people enough space to realize there was nowhere left to hide. "Last chance," Vincent said. His voice remained calm, but the room seemed to lean toward it. "Who sent you?" The executive let out a sharp breath through his nose, and for a second Emma thought he might still choose silence. Instead, his mouth twisted, and he gave a short, bitter laugh. "You really think I'm the one who came up with this?" Vincent's eyes narrowed. The answer was not enough, but it was close enough to matter. Emma felt her pulse jump. The man was slipping. He knew it too. He had been the one at the table, the one with the expensive suit and the polished lie, but the fear in his face now belonged to someone already defeated. "Then say the name," Vincent said. The executive's gaze flicked toward the door again, only for an instant, but Vincent caught it. Of course he did. The guard by the entrance shifted his weight, ready. The lawyers had gone pale and still, their earlier confidence reduced to statues made of paperwork and dread. Emma's mind raced. There was another layer to this, another hand behind the hand, a deeper current running under the table, one that had expected the deal to close cleanly and Vincent to be blind until it was too late. But the note had ruined that plan. Her warning had forced the entire machine into the light. Suddenly, the executive struck the table with the side of his palm. The sound cracked through the room. "You want the truth?" he snapped, voice rising for the first time. "Fine. I was hired to make sure you signed before the end of the quarter. That's all. I never said I was working alone." Vincent didn't flinch. "By whom?" The executive's face contorted, torn between fear and fury. For one second, Emma saw a man who had been promised safety and delivered none. "I don't know the full name," he said at last, words forced out like broken glass. "Only the initials. K.M." Emma frowned, but Vincent did not. His expression changed in a way she could not read at first, something harder, sharper, almost unreadable. Then she saw it. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. He had heard that name before, or something close to it. The room went even stiller. Emma realized the real danger was now moving from the table to the world beyond it. Vincent reached for his phone, but he did not take his eyes off the executive. "You're done," he said. "If you've got any sense left, you'll stay where you are and pray I decide to be merciful." The executive looked like he wanted to argue, but whatever courage had kept him upright was gone. The truth had broken through, and with it came the collapse. Vincent's attention shifted briefly to Emma. His gaze was intense, almost measuring, as if this new piece of the puzzle had changed her from a stranger into something far more important. Then, without warning, he turned to his security team. "Lock the room." The command was instant. Doors moved. Guards spread out. The elegant meeting space, once built for deals and polished smiles, had become a sealed chamber where a hidden name had just surfaced. And Emma, standing at the center of it all, understood that the note she had delivered was not the end of the story. It was only the first crack in something much larger. The room remained sealed, but the tension inside it had begun to feel less like business and more like a confession waiting to happen. Vincent stood near the head of the table with his phone in hand, his jaw set, his expression unreadable except for the fire behind his eyes. The initials had changed everything. K.M. Whoever that was, the name clearly reached farther than one crooked executive and one poison contract. Emma could feel it in the air, that subtle shift from immediate danger to something larger, colder, and much harder to stop. The executive had collapsed into silence now. He sat with his head lowered, as if avoiding Vincent's stare might somehow reduce the damage. It would not. Vincent was already speaking into his phone in a low, controlled voice, giving instructions that made the guards move faster, the lawyers retreat farther back, and the room feel even smaller than before. Emma remained where he had told her to stay, though every part of her body wanted to step back, to put distance between herself and the storm now gathering around the table. But something in Vincent's voice held her in place. Not authority alone. Focus. He was not reacting like a man who had simply been betrayed. He was reacting like someone who had just recognized the shape of an old enemy. When he ended the call, he looked at the executive with open contempt. "You should have known better than to bring me a name you can't carry," he said. The executive laughed weakly, almost hysterically. "You think this ends with me?" Vincent's eyes flicked up, sharp and dangerous. "No, I think this begins with you." Emma caught the way the guards exchanged glances at that. They understood it too. The man in the gray suit had been a pawn, maybe even a desperate one, and the person behind him had used him carefully, like a blade meant to be discarded after the cut. Vincent set the phone down and turned toward the far end of the room, staring through the glass wall as if the answer might be waiting in the city lights beyond. Then he spoke without looking back. "Find out who K.M. is connected to." One of the guards nodded immediately and moved toward the door. Emma's stomach tightened. She had expected the deal to fall apart, maybe even for the executive to be exposed, but not this. Not the way Vincent's posture had changed from controlled anger to something darker, older, and far more personal. There was history here. She could feel it without knowing the details. Vincent finally looked at her again. This time the mask was thinner. He did not look at her like a waitress anymore. He looked at her like a witness. Someone who had entered the room by accident and ended up touching the center of the trap. "What's your name?" he asked. The question was quiet, almost strange in a room full of broken plans. Emma hesitated, then answered, "Emma Brooks." Vincent repeated it once, as if committing it to memory. "You saw what no one else saw, Emma Brooks." Something in the way he said her name made her stand a little straighter. For the first time, she sensed that the danger surrounding her was changing shape. She had not only interrupted a deal, she had stepped into Vincent Cole's world and forced him to notice her. Across the table, the executive lifted his head just enough to look at her, and in his stare, she saw something worse than hate. Fear, not for what Emma had done, but for what her presence now meant. If Vincent began asking questions, the wrong people would start losing sleep. The real truth, Emma realized, was still hidden behind layers of loyalty, money, and old grudges. And now she was no longer outside that truth. She was inside it. By the time the room finally began to move again, nothing about it felt the same. The contract was dead, the polished illusion of the meeting had shattered, and the people who had entered with confidence now looked as if they were trying to remember how to breathe. Vincent remained standing at the head of the table, calm on the surface, but still carrying the kind of force that made everyone else lower their eyes. Emma could feel the weight of that attention settle on her, not as pressure exactly, but as a kind of impossible awareness. She had crossed a line the moment she placed the note in his hand, and there was no stepping back from it now. The executive had been escorted away under guard, his protest fading into the hallway, but his fear lingered in the room like smoke. Vincent did not watch him go. His focus had already shifted to something bigger, something invisible, but close enough to matter. KM. The initials sat in the air between them like a threat with a pulse. One of the guards returned with a phone and a clipboard, whispering something low enough that only Vincent could hear. He answered with a brief nod, then turned his attention to Emma again. This time the look in his eyes was different from before. The suspicion was still there, but it had been joined by something else, respect, perhaps, or recognition, or the first hard edge of trust. "You should not have been able to get close enough to warn me," he said. "That means you either have excellent instincts, or someone very dangerous underestimated you." Emma tried not to let the intensity of his voice shake her. "Maybe both," she said quietly. A faint, almost imperceptible shift crossed Vincent's face. It was not a smile, not exactly. More like the beginning of one that had not been used in a very long time. The room around them was already clearing. Lawyers gathered papers with nervous hands. Security began checking the corridor. The elegant dinner setting now looked like evidence from a crime scene dressed in silver and crystal. But Vincent and Emma remained at the center of it, two people who had started the night as strangers and ended it tied to the same invisible danger. "Come with me," Vincent said. The words were simple, yet they changed the temperature of the room all over again. Emma blinked. "Where?" "Somewhere this name can be explained properly." He picked up the note, folded it once, and slid it into his pocket as if it belonged there now. That small gesture made something inside Emma tighten. He was not dismissing her. He was taking her seriously. And that, more than anything, was the moment she understood the shape of the story she had stepped into. Whatever came next would not be a thank you, and it would not be safe. Vincent looked at her one last time before turning toward the door. If you're staying, he said, stay because you understand what comes after this. Emma looked at the empty chair, the broken deal, the ring of silent men, and the city glowing beyond the glass like nothing had happened. Then she followed him, not because she was fearless, but because the truth had already chosen her. Outside the room, the real story was waiting. And somewhere behind the polished walls of the city, someone named K.M. had just learned that the wrong woman had delivered the wrong warning to the wrong man at exactly the wrong time.